Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm going to start with perhaps even a more troubling question, which is what happens even when students graduate? What kind of skills they leave higher education with? So even when we get to that success point, even when we get them across the finish line, what does it actually look like? I will try to summarize 2 books in 15 minutes and see how well I can do that. But I'm going to draw on the work that I've been doing for the last few years with Richard Aram on academically adrift and aspiring adults adrift. We have, since basically 2006, been tracking students through college with the help of Lumina, Teagle, Carnegie foundations, as well as CAE, who has helped us with data collection. So we are grateful. Lumina, Ford, Teagle, and Carnegie, sorry. So I'm going to get started right into data and the results, given that I have 15 minutes to try to convey some important information. To just give you a sense of what are we looking at, so in kind of idea of what our data can say, we are tracking students from the fall of 2005, which was the fall of their freshman year, as they progress through college. These are all 4-year college students who are what would be called traditional college students, so kind of your 18-year-olds full-time enrolled. They're progressing through. We're talking to them again in the spring of 2007, which is the sophomore year, and then spring of 2009, which is their senior year. We follow them then after college to 1 year out and 2 years out to see how they're doing after they've actually completed their 4 years of study. Academically Adrift covers the first 2 years of college and looks at about 2,300 students as they make those 2 crucial years. And then Aspiring Adults Adrift looks at the whole 4 years of college and then what happens to students afterwards. And we're talking about 1,600 students in their senior year and about 1,000 students afterwards. We also do have some interviews, but I'm not going to use those when we talk today. So in addition to surveys, so we've surveyed students, asked them a lot about their experiences, their courses, their extracurriculars, what they do in college and how things are going. But we also had something called the CLA. And given that you're in New York, many of you may know about the CLA, the Collegiate Learning Assessment. It is an instrument that aims to measure critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. Those are the skills that most of us say are the goals of higher education, that we want to develop those skills, that students who graduate, particularly with 4-year degrees, should be able to think critically, analyze, engage the world, and write competently. This is a direct measure of students' performance in these dimensions. And why I emphasize that is that even though in higher education we've had lots of conversations about student learning, they've mostly been based on student self-report. So in a senior year of college, we ask students right before they exit, how much do you think you have learned in critical thinking, writing, and problem solving? And they all say they learned a lot. We all think we're better than average, right? We all think that we do a great job. And so the question was, how well can we validate that with some kind of an instrument that's actually an objective measure? And we've been doing that in K through 12 for a very long time. We're trying to actually understand how well students perform on different metrics. It is not a multiple choice instrument, which was important to us, and it tries to essentially be a holistic way of measuring these complex skills. It tries to place students in an environment in which they might find themselves after college, give them a scenario, give them documents, information, and they have to read, analyze, synthesize, and write about. I'm happy to talk a lot more about the instrument in Q&A, but wanted to at least give you a flavor of what this is like. So what does this look like? Okay, so the students take the test, right, at the fall of their freshman year, the end of their sophomore year, end of their senior year. How much do they improve? The first 2 years of college, the students improve 0.18 standard deviations. For those of you who don't care about standard deviations, that is a 7 percentile point gain. Okay, what that means is that if students came in at a 50th percentile, right in the middle of the distribution, 2 years later, after 2 years of college instruction, they would be only at a 57th percentile of the incoming freshman class. Okay, they've only moved 7 percentile points. And one can say, well, the first 2 years are kind of rough. Right? It's big classes, lectures, students are not in their majors yet, they're not really engaged, so maybe things get better. Unfortunately, they don't. Okay? When we look at 4 years of college, the gain is only about half a standard deviation, which is 18 percentile points. If you divide it out based on how many semesters are in between these time points, you'd actually get exactly the same gain for every single semester. And so, students don't necessarily pick up and really start developing these skills as they enter their junior or senior year. One question here is also, well, this instrument, how good is it? It's new, it's just being developed, how can we think about it? So I put up there a study done by Ernie Pascarella at Iowa and his colleagues that replicated the findings of our study. And they find, with a different sample, different instrument, different group of schools, different group of students, they find that a gain between a freshman and senior year is about 17 percentile points, right? So it seems at least that we are consistent in the sense that this is about how much students gain over their 4 years of college. We have called this limited learning, and I'm happy to talk about that more in terms of whether it is and why do we call it limiting learning. And it's not just limited, it's highly unequal, okay? So these are just descriptive statistics for students from different family backgrounds, so whose parents have high school or less, some college degree or graduate professional degrees. And if you look at, in the first year, students who are from less educated families, of course, enter college with lower performance in the CLA scores. Part of the good news, I guess, is that everybody gains over time. So if you look at the gray bars, right, they go up for each group of students, so everybody gains, and the gain is about the same across. Now, on the one hand, that's good news, which means everybody's improving in terms of all students from all family backgrounds. The other side of it is that inequality persists, right? Essentially what this says is with whatever inequality students enter college, that's the same that they leave. Right? So essentially what we're doing is just kind of moving them up to the next level, but not actually addressing the inequalities with which they enter. By race and ethnicity, the news is much worse. So if we look at CLA scores, again, at the freshman year and the senior year, African-American students enter college, right, substantially behind their white peers. So other groups do so as well, but the gap between African-American and white students is substantial. And it's not even that. The gap grows over time. So if you look at the differences between the black and the gray bars, right, there's the least amount of improvement for the African-American students, and there's most improvement for the white students, right? So it's not only that African-American students enter behind our colleges and universities in terms of their performance on critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing, it is that they actually even fall further behind. They're graduating college even when they make it through, and we know that completion rates are not great, and they vary by class and race. Even when they actually finish and get to that finish line, they're leaving college with substantially lower levels of critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing skills than their white peers. Why that's the case, right? We try to kind of explore a little bit what might be driving those gaps. And so these are just model-based results, kind of trying to think about different factors that contribute to those gaps. These are the two important differences, right? About a third of that gap is due to academic preparation, right? So African-American students enter college, as has been mentioned this morning, with lower levels of academic preparation, and we're talking about SAT scores and high school GPA, and that has a lot to do with how they progress through college and their gaps in CLA performance. And then there's also some contribution here to the institutions themselves. And I think conversation this morning was about, we have to look at K through 12, and we have to look at ourselves in higher education. And I think this figure suggests that a big part of the gap has to do with what they bring in from K through 12, but there's also a good portion of the gap, even net of academic preparation, that has to do with institutions they attend, right? African-American students tend to attend institutions that show lower gains in CLA over time. And so it's something we have to think about and be concerned about, both in terms of how they come and what we do afterwards. I'm trying to do a little good news after I've done all the bad news. So the good news is that there's certain things we can do in higher education that actually move the needle in a sense of improving critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. One thing we can do is we can expect a lot of students. When students say that their faculty have high expectations, they improve their critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing much more than when students say the faculty don't. Similarly, when students are asked to read and write in their classes, they improve their critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. Well, that's not surprising, right? If you have to read, if you have to write, if you have to actually engage in complex tasks, you're going to improve the skills that are in. Now, sorry, I'm going to slip back to the bad side. The bad side is that very few students do these things. Okay? So we're talking about reading and writing requirements here that are quite basic. So we asked students in terms of how many courses they took in which they had to write 20 pages over the course of a semester. Right? So we're not talking about big 20-page papers, just 20 pages all semester long. These are 4-year students full-time. And basically, half of them say, I don't take classes like that, right? And then we ask how many of them are assigned to read 40 pages a week. And they're just, you're being asked to do it. We're not even talking about doing it with depth, with care, with, syllabus. It says you have to do it. And a third of the students say, I don't take classes like that, right? So, even though when students read and when students write, and there's other evidence that when they engage in more complex tasks, right, deep learning, and application and innovation, they actually do better. But the problem is that many of them do not engage in those kinds of tasks. So on one hand, we know certain things that matter and certain things that make a difference. On the other hand, those things are hard to find in higher education. Similarly, when we look at students' time use, this is just kind of what do they do with their time? They're not reading and writing a whole lot, right? So they're also not studying a whole lot. Average four-year full-time college student today spend 12 hours a week studying. Okay, 12 hours a week studying. And actually, they spend 9 hours a week studying alone, right? Although we're never alone these days, right? There's always a gadget with us. But, and then they spend about 3 hours a week studying with peers. These are the gains on the CLA scores, and you can see that when students spend more time studying alone, the CLA scores go up. When they spend time studying with peers, those scores go down at about the same rate they go down when they spend time in fraternities and sororities. Now, this finding has gotten quite a lot of attention, and I'm happy to talk about it more in Q&A, but I think it's an important issue to think about in terms of how students spend their time, and are they investing in activities that help to facilitate their critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing. The other question is, the other thing that matters, right, is college major. Okay? So students who major in social sciences, humanities, science, and math, so what we usually think about as kind of the arts and science core, those students perform substantially better on the CLA over time than the students in other fields. The lowest gains in the CLA scores over time are in business and education and social work. And now, again, what's troubling here is that business has become the #1 major in our colleges and is now the biggest major in foreign institutions. And so, we know where students improve these skills, we know where learning is happening, but we seem to be doing everything we can in higher education to move away from those places and move into places where less learning occurs. Now, why does it matter? I mean, first of all, I guess it matters because we should care. We should care whether our students are leaving college with critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing skills. And the other reason we should care is because it matters for the labor market. Okay? So this is just one snapshot from the second book, which is that when students leave college with low CLA scores, okay, they are much more likely to be unemployed. They're also much more likely to be in unskilled occupations. And there's a whole lot of other things we look at in a book, right? So it's not just about our commitment and what we care about and what matters to us. It's also how we are preparing these students for the transition afterwards. So that is just kind of a summary for you. What we're talking about is we have limited learning in higher education. We have persisting or growing gaps in learning across students from different backgrounds. Academic rigor is associated with improved learning, but academic rigor seems to be low, right? And then employment outcomes matter with what happens in college, and therefore we should care both because it matters to us as educators, but also because it matters what happens to students after they leave. Thank you.